this sprint, we're going to be practicing dividing a number by another number where the dividend is a multiple of 10 and the divisor may or may not be a multiple of 10. So let's just recall some terminology here. A number divided by another number gives you the answer, which is called the quotient. So the first number is called the dividend, the second number is called the divisor. So a dividend divided by a divisor is a quotient. In this very simple example, 6 divided by 2 is 3. 6 is the dividend, 2 is the divisor, 3 is the quotient. So the first type of problem you'll encounter in this sprint is where this first number is a multiple of 10, but the second number is not. For example, 30,000 divided by 5. So in this kind of problem, you might not know right away what 30,000 divided by 5 is. Maybe you do, but if you don't, think, is there a factor of 30,000 that I can easily divide by 5? And you might say, yeah, 30. I can take 30 divided by 5. I know what that is. That's 6. So think 30 divided by 5 is 6. So what would 30,000 divided by 5 equal? And that should be pretty evident to you that that would be 6,000. Because what you're doing is you're taking 30 groups of 1,000, dividing it by 5. You're going to end up with 6 groups of 1,000, or 6,000. So in your head you can say, I could divide that by 5, I get 6, and then add whatever zeros are left. 6,000. So that's how you can do that problem. Let's try another one like that. 42,000 divided by 7. So here again we can say, I know what 42 divided by 7 is. That would be 6. Oh, looks like I'm going to get the same answer here. I didn't mean to do that, but 42 divided by 7 is 6. So 42,000 divided by 7 would be 6,000. So these same zeros show up in the answer. Okay, so that's one type of problem you'll see. And another type of problem you'll see in this sprint is where the dividend and the divisor are both multiples of 10. And I'll give you a little hint here. Every problem in this sprint, the divisor is actually a factor of the dividend, which means they divide evenly out. You should get a whole number in all of these problems. So in this one, there's a few ways to think about it, but you can think about 20 as really 2 times 10, or 10 times 2. Whoops. So if you divide something by 20, it's the same thing as dividing it by 10 and then dividing it again by 2. And if you think about this, it makes sense. You have 8,000 of something, want to divide it into 20 groups. You could get the same effect by dividing it into 10 groups and then dividing each of those. So dividing by 10 and then dividing each of those by 2. So now this problem becomes 8,000 divided by 10 divided by 2. So we're going to break it up like this because we want to think about this part first. 8,000 divided by 10. And you can think about this as a fraction. And if you might recall how to simplify fractions, you can divide the numerator is the top, and the denominator, the bottom, by the same number, and then you get an equivalent fraction. So I could divide the top by 10 and the bottom by 10, and I would get 800 over 1. And what I'm essentially doing is getting rid of the same number of zeros in the numerator and the denominator. So I can get rid of a 0 here, and I get rid of a 0 there, and I get 800. So up here I can even, in my head, think of this 8,000 divided by 10 as a fraction, and in my head get rid of 1 0 in the numerator and the denominator, or you can say in the dividend and the divisor. So then I end up with this part here is 800, and then I need to divide that by 2 still. And that, I hope you know, is 400. So that's that problem. And then just kind of reviewing a little, 8,000 divided by 20. If you see this on a sprint, you can kind of just, in your head, kind of think, well, I'm going to divide them both by 10, because 20 is just 10 times 2. And if I divide a fraction, you can think of this as a fraction. If you divide the numerator and the denominator by 10, I get rid of a 0 on both. And now I can think, well, I'm left with 800 divided by the 2, which is left there, and I get 400. And what essentially you just did is you divided in 2 steps. You divided by 10 first, and then by 2. And that's kind of what we did up here. By 10 first, and then by 2. Let's look at another one. 81,000 divided by 900. So again, what you're actually doing is breaking this 900 up into 100 times 9. So then you can divide first the 81,000, just ignore my timer, divided by 100. So Jane, can you turn that timer off? So just think of this again as a fraction in your head, and you could divide top and bottom by a factor that goes into both, which would be 100. So you're essentially dividing that by 100 and this by 100. And what happens is that you are essentially just crossing off the same number of zeros in the numerator and the denominator, because if you divide 100 by 100, you get 1, and if you divide 81,000 by 100, you take off 2 zeros, and you get 810. So that's the first part, but we still need to divide by the 9. So what we did so far, we did 81,000 divided by 100, but we still have to take that then and divide it by 9. So 810 divided by 9. Now we're kind of back to that kind of problem we showed in the beginning, where we can say, oh, I know what 81 divided by 9 is. That's 9. So 810 divided by 9, that's kind of like 81 tens. 81 tens divided by 9 would be 9 tens, or 90. So, or you can just think 81 divided by 9 is 9. I got 1 0 left. It has to go back in my answer, and it's 90. Okay, and let's do one final one. These problems are a little hard, so I want to give you a lot of examples. 28,000 divided by 700. This one I'm just going to kind of walk you through. I'm going to skip some of those steps of rewriting it as fractions and stuff like that, of how I would think about this. So I'm just going to think in my head, 700, that's 100 times 7. So I can divide by 100 first, and that makes it so that I'm essentially just getting rid of 2 zeros in the numerator and the denominator of my fraction, or you can think in the dividend and the divisor of my problem. And now what I'm left with is 280 divided by 7, and there I can think, oh, I know 28 divided by 7, that's 4, and I have a 0 left, so it's 40. So let me just kind of write down a summary of how to approach these problems. So there's kind of two steps to these problems. One is you want to divide the dividend and divisor, or if you're thinking fraction in your head, that's the numerator and denominator, by the largest multiple of 10 that you can. The largest multiple of 10 common to both. That's a factor of both. So in this one, the largest multiple of 10 of both would be 100, because 700 was 7 times 100. So I was dividing both numbers by 100. And that, remember, just essentially crosses off 2 zeros of each. Okay, so that's the first step. And then the second step is basically just dividing what is left. Divide what is left. And so in this case, what was left was 280 divided by 7. And you know, if you need to think of that as a fraction, so it may be helpful to think of this as a fraction. It may or may not. You do what helps you. So, you know, you could up here think, oh, 280 divided by 7. Oh, that's just 28 times 10 divided by 7. And 7 goes into 28 4 times. My answer becomes 4 times 10, or 40. So there's many ways to think about these problems, and if one of these ways works for you, use it. The beautiful thing about math is that it's consistent and that you can go about things in multiple ways, and you should always get the same answer. So hopefully that helps. Good luck with the sprint.